Hello and thanks for joining us. It's another edition of your Sunday show, Frontline. Just a few days ago, the national conference took what I would call a recess. Of course, before they did, there were successes, there were challenges, and now a lot of people are talking about what's the way forward. A couple of issues were on the front burner. Some were sorted out, but some became very controversial. Today on our program, we'll be speaking with two delegates to the national conference, one from the north, one from the south, one a male and one a female, because we want to see it from all the angles. I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Mrs. Hanatu Ladi Ibrahim, MFR. Dr. Hanatu is a delegate from Gombe State. Besides being a delegate, she runs an NGO Guidance and Counseling Development Association. Dr. Hanatu, you're welcome.
Thank you.
I also have Dr. Joe Orji, a federal government delegate to the national conference. He is also former governor of Gombe State, coincidentally. Dr. Joe Orji, you're welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Well, in the last 4 months or thereabout, you've all been in Abuja looking at everything that concerns Nigeria, so to say. And then not too long ago, you took a recess. Of course, one of the issues that were not resolved was derivation. But let's go back, because we want to look at the successes and challenges of this conference, and then where do we go from here. Let me start with you, Dr. Ladi Ibrahim.
Yes.
What was the biggest challenge to the conference and those of you that are delegates to the conference in this last 4 months?
Well, the biggest challenge was at first when we all assembled and Mr. President addressed us. A lot of people, and even with the members of the delegates, we felt we may not be able to work together as a team because of our areas where we all came from. So it became a challenge to settle down. But when Mr. President addressed us and gave us open blanket, he did not say there are no go areas and we should discuss everything, not to jeopardize the unity of this country. So we all came together and sat down and settled. The other challenge was the question of land tenure. It became a challenge to the delegates. And then the other one, as you rightly said during your introduction, is question of this derivation, the issue of resource control, which is key to any nation. And these were some of the thorny issues that more or less became like some concern and a bone of contention.
Okay, Dr. Orji, Dr. Ladi Ibrahim has talked about bonding. That's what I could call bonding at the beginning of the conference, and of course the other issues she raised. From your own point of view, were these the only challenges that the delegates faced when they arrived at Abuja?
Honestly speaking, adding to what Auntie Hanatu had just said, where first of all, the problem which delegates were enmeshed in terms of suspicion as to the genuineness of the concept of the conference by Mr. President. People had come from various leanings, political leanings and interest leanings, and also haven't been battered by a lot of wrongly placed opinions of the larger public, who are drawing from experiences of the last conferences and on their own, concluding that this was just going to be a jamboree. And so a lot of delegates too were under pressure, under these misguided feelings. And of course, they were right to do that, have such feelings. Getting there, a lot of people were in various interest shades as to why we were there, if it was not one of those gimmicks by the government, essentially by Mr. President, since 2015 was just at hand. But as she rightly said, when Mr. President inaugurated us, his demeanor, his sincerity of purpose, his clarity of the mandate and mission contained in the document, cleared, in fact, all the doubts, and he won over all the delegates, most of the delegates, I should say, at that point in time. So it was, he laid, the platform by our seeing his person, seeing his demeanor, and seeing the message. So our debating his message gave us a lot of life and gave a lot of impetus and the way out, to the entire conference. So I think those were highlights. Then, of course, the modalities for the conference, and trying to craft out the rules of procedure. Essentially, how do we come to conclusions? How do we come to decisions? The methodology of voting and all that. As you recall, that gave the conference some hard time agreeing with percentages, whether it was going to be 75%, it was going to be 66% or 66 point something percent. And, we overcame that by agreeing at 70%. Should there be no consensus, the voting was going to be based on 70%. Those were initial problems we had, which the conference, had varying opinions, but later, we converged and had consensus to adopt 70%, should consensus at various levels, the committee levels and the plenary levels, if they failed. But we didn't have to use it after all at the end of the day.
Well, in the last 4 months that you've been here, as much as those of you that are delegates try to say that you were being selfless, you were thinking Nigeria, a lot of people still saw the unseen hand of tribal interests, religious interests, regional interests, and all that in discussions. And people were wondering whether we hadn't gotten to a point where Nigerians can sit down and discuss as Nigerians, and not as Hausas, Igbos, Ijaws, Efiks, and all that. Wasn't that also a big problem, Dr. Ladi Ibrahim?
Well, in every given situation, there are pros and cons. And therefore, that issue tried to come up because many people came with that intuition, especially when it came to the number of the delegates that were brought to the conference. Some parts of the north, actually the northern part, their numbers were less than our counterparts from the other parts of the country. But for me, having worked all over the place in this country, I worked in radio, I've been to East, I've been to South, I've been to other places, and in my family and most of my friends, we have Christians, we have Muslims. To me, it wasn't a concern, but to some, it was a concern because of their way of perceiving things. And you can't rule that out because they must have been hearing what has been taking place in most parts of this country. But you see, God created Muslims, He created Christians. Maybe if I was born in Enugu, I would have been an Igbo girl. Okay? And if I was born in Kano, I would have been a Muslim, a Kano girl. Or if I have been born in Europe, I would be a woman in diaspora. So you can find all these type of things in life. And so there were, among us, there were those who were like that. We have mixtures. There are this question of mixed marriages. So you had some Igbos who were half Northerners, you have some Muslims, you have some Christians. And so as we continued, as the process continued, we decided making friends. And so that question of suspicion cannot be ruled out completely. More so that there are people from different political parties and from different areas of expertise, and we had the physically challenged in the group, we had labor, we had civil society, and therefore that issue was there. And since we all understood the caliber and the type of people that were there, especially having introduced ourselves, there was other problems with issue of resources. What the delegates were expecting with regards to their staff, with regards to their drivers, that too was a contributory factor to the problems that were there. But having discussed it, you know, it's good to discuss issues. You can have your perception at the beginning, and then later, when you sit down and weigh what is around, and you ask questions and get to know what it entails, then you overcome the problem. And this is what happened during the conference. And so, as time went on, you know, we were able to overcome some of these difficulties.
Okay, even before the conference started, a lot of Nigerians were wondering how would delegates address the issue of corruption? Because at the root of almost every problem in the country is corruption. Dr. Orji, how did the conference tackle this national monster?
Yes. Actually, the issue of corruption had always featured everywhere in national discourse. And we know that it is central to most of the problems that the country and challenges we are going through now. So the conference, right from day one, was worried and conscious of this and the methodology to get rid of it. So luckily, that fell into one of the committees. It was a topical issue on one of the committees. And not only that, it was treated holistically as a topic, we also found it permeating in all the aspects of our national discourse over there. And the sum total of it is, how do we begin to address the issue of corruption in the country? It is multifaceted, the ways of approach. Because if you take, for instance, from the political angle, you want to look at, governance, having the correct leadership, and the leaders doing the right thing at all times. And of course, correspondingly, the followers, understanding what it takes to be good followers and good citizens, civic responsibilities, and the responsibilities they owe to the nation state, and also understanding the constitution, how the ordinary man, the masses come in, their rights and privileges, keeping to them. And for the leaders also to know their responsibilities at every layer of responsibility given to them, and what they owe to the people, realizing that they are servants to the people and not their masters. Trying to see how we can build this into all the areas, all the committees, because you see, it's not just one committee trying to enunciate the ways of tackling, or you should go to jail, this man should be banished, or you should be shot. That's not it. We are looking at it beyond, right from right from the lowest echelon, to give you a proper picture of where we are going to in terms of corruption, because corruption is not only limited to these people who are sitting in offices and writing millions or billions away. Not only that, there is corruption of the mind, there's corruption of thought. There are so many things, that we believe that we have gaps as a nation that we ought to work very hard, to tackle. But be it as it were, there are some areas that, the conference frowned at very seriously. And they came up with, prescriptions of huge sanctions in terms of embezzlement, in terms of stealing from the pensions, sweat and blood, as we have seen. And a lot of hard recommendations were also made by the committee, by the conference, to at least ensure that the public is aware of the penalties for defiances or those who will drift into this. But the issue of corruption is very endemic and is everywhere. And we have looked at all those areas, and in the various committees, they come up with areas of narrowing those gaps and trying to stem the growth of corruption in our society.
Well, when you talk about corruption and then you talk about immunity, a lot of people feel that the conference didn't do as much as they wished as it concerned immunity for public officers. Do you think that this conference, the prescriptions, that it will do much to stop corruption at very high places? I'm asking Dr. Hanatu.
Well, you see, as far as I'm concerned, as His Excellency has rightly explained, because he's one of my mentors, and having seen corruption from the good old days to the present system that is going on, it's a question of mindset. It's a question of family values, as he said. Now, you have to make up your mind to bring a change. It has to be all of us, and that was my concern, that each and every one of us at that conference must make up his or her mind that she's not going to be corrupt. She's not going to participate in corruption, and they are going to bring up their families in a way that will discourage corruption. And the issue that you've just mentioned, the conference did tackle it, because we did say all those corrupt officers who are at the highest level that has immunity, the immunity should be removed. Because that is what, if you don't remove that immunity, it is what encourages everybody to embezzle. You see, people become corrupt because they want to amass wealth to get positions. People don't get elected because of their performance. They get elected because of the money value of what they have stolen, and they can be able to buy their way through the polls. And that is why corruption will continue as long as people amass money. I'm one of those who believes that corruption is not only at the high level. You see, for example, you find a clerk or an accountant in the office stealing money with pen. Then somebody who steals a goat, you punish him, and the person who has stolen billions get away with it. That is encouraging corruption. How can somebody who has stolen money, you are condoning him, you are giving him support to participate in governance, whereas the money he amasses, he doesn't get back to his community, to the poor masses who can hardly afford 2 square meals a day. And then you say corruption can be eradicated. For example, if you punish those who are having the immunity clause, what about those who are doing it the other way around? What do you do with them? What about those who are vandalizing oil pipelines? What about those who are stealing cattle, cutting away the cattle of the poor cattle rearers and going away with? It's part of corruption. So corruption is all over. What about the reverends, the pastors, the church people who are stealing the contributions made by the members of their church to buy jets, to do other things? It's corruption. So corruption is all over. But I am of the view that the only way to stop it is not just by removing immunity clause. No, that adds to it. And then punishing those who steal the money. After you collect the money back from them, and then they don't get immunity. So that immunity, we discussed at length that it should not be there. It should be removed. But you know, this thing depends on how the discussions will be taken and put into consideration. And this thing, you know, it depends again on how our legislators will take it, because it's not only the discussions of the conference or our individual views that will help the situation. It's a collective responsibility by each and every Nigerian, right from, we have to catch them young, right from the family values, as he has said. And that is why those of us in the civil society, we are talking against corruption at all levels.
Okay, let's talk about big government, you know, about recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. A lot of Nigerians feel scandalized that in a country like ours, a greater percentage of money that comes to government is spent on recurrent expenditure, paying salaries, sustaining 54 ministers, sustaining 20-something commissioners in states, and National Assembly and all that. Mm-hmm. What was the position of the National Conference to big government and being able to use more money in capital expenditure, like building roads, supporting agriculture, power, energy, and all that? What was the position of the National Conference?
A lot of these issues were discussed at length in the various subcommittees, because the subcommittees are interwoven. When one area is handled, the other sector runs into the other one. And so these issues were handled. And that was why most of the discussion centered on having a lean government, because that will curtail some of the expenditure. There was question of the issue of the legislators. There was question of the issue of creating of more states. Will it not increase the expenditure and our situation? Because, for example, if you try to look at the issues of how the resources are shared, Gombe State and Ebonyi State are the least that gets their own revenue share. Is the least. They are the babies. You can imagine how they are suffering. But you can imagine places like Kano, Akwa Ibom, and other places. They get a lot of money, and they can fiddle with it and do all sorts of things. And then in some ministries, the budget that is given to them is so much. And the other things, because I remember, for me as a media woman, I follow discussions. Sometimes you find out that certain monies are collected, they are not remitted to the government, so as to cushion the shortage of the funds being received. And in the committee that I served in, the civil society, the labor, the youth, and sports, I saw that there were money being wasted in other areas of governance rather than adding it to other areas. So if the duplication of functions, there's too many ministries are there, and they are interwoven, you find out that in running their activities, they are interwoven. So cutting down some ministries, you have a minister of state, ministers of state, you have a minister, the foreign affairs, you have, this is part of how our resources go. And we all discuss and touch into these areas. And sometimes my colleagues, the media, ask to these problems because they are supposed to speak according to our profession. You are supposed to have balanced reporting. But we see corruption and we don't talk about it. We see money being spent, being siphoned. Nobody talks about it. And our leaders, the ministers, the commissioners, whoever, they don't have conscience, because in other parts of the world, when you are accused of something, you resign on your own because you have a conscience. And then you move out of sight so that the thing can be investigated properly. But here we don't have that. And therefore, the only way we can reduce some of these things is you or we. Now I'm no longer practicing, even though once a journalist, we are always one. You are supposed to expose some of these things. And it is not only government, the heavy government. Even the business sector. Do you know some of these big men, they don't remit their taxes. It's part of corruption. And it's part of making the government not to have enough resources, because if you are paying your revenue, it will reduce some of the debts that the government is going through. It will cushion the resources that come into government. And therefore, it is, as I always say, a collective responsibility. For example, the ordinary citizen, if he doesn't have money to pay for his bills, he will go and discuss with a worker of the NEPA to come and connect it overhead. It's part of reducing the revenue, the resources. So it's a collective responsibility. All of us have to look at the way we can increase our revenue, we can reduce it, and how we can reduce our expenditure. And then cost of living is adding to some of these problems. So we discussed on these issues of how we should have lean government and how we should encourage manufacturing companies to come up, revamp them, so that we don't have to depend on external borrowing, one, and to depend on things being imported from outside. We have enough in this country to sustain us, but we don't explore them so as to help us to move on. And so it's not only just the governance side, it's a collective responsibility.
Okay, one other area that got a little controversial, a lot of bashing for the delegates, and some support in some areas, was state creation. And some people are asking, every month the 36 states come to Abuja to divide whatever is the revenue that has come to the country. And a lot of investigation show or have shown that most of the states don't have any appreciable IGR. And when you say IGR, people just think the IGR is tax and deductible revenue. We are talking about agriculture yielding revenue for states and all that. And the delegates are talking about creation of additional states. Dr. Orji, what informed the decision of the national conference to suggest that more states should be created, when no state, almost no state in the country, outside probably Lagos, can sustain itself?
Okay, it would sound good the way it is stated like that. But it is not in conformity with the static reality. When you understand the fact that right from time, there had always been this problem of trying to balance the gains out of governance or federalism, and also the aspirations of the federative units, as it were. That had always been a problem. And you cannot also attain national stability without recognizing the fact that the structure that you are going to run or you are running must be stable, and it must be the structure that people will buy into and be happy to work with you. And it is only when that structure, the people buy into it, that the issue of governance, good governance, can also, come in. When you talk about issue of IGR, diminishing IGR or no IGR, yes, it is an issue of bad governance. It is also an issue of bad governance because there is no, God has given this country so much. If it is agriculture, we have, massive lands everywhere as you go from north to south, where governments can develop a lot of agri activities, settlements, and specialize in cash crops or food crops and develop seriously. And areas that, they are endowed otherwise, like in the southeast, entrepreneurial developments, where you can catch them and make sure that you aggregate all these artisans and all these people, into a perfect, cooperatives and so on, provide enabling environment for them to produce, even if it is, spanner he is producing. You can inject something as a local, as a government around them, so as to perfect that spanner, so that it is not a fake spanner. The additive you can do to it, and they can produce more, and even service beyond your own local area. In West Africa, Africa, the market is so wide, but it's indolence and also problem of leadership. So we cannot say because we have made the wrong choice of persons or leaders. Therefore, the structural harmony which you need in order to accommodate nationals within the setup to suffer, because we had imbalances in states creation, problems that were many ethno groups came in and convinced the conference that there should be need to look into the issue of state creation. Some of the areas they are operating where they are too far from government. I take a typical example is the Northeast, in Borno State, for instance. Borno State is almost 70,000 square kilometers in size. It's the largest in this country. And there are so many, ethnic nationalities. And some of the areas, why today, perhaps, as a contributory factor, is that the government is very far away from some of the persons or some of the places. And we have seen that if you bring this government nearer to the people, what differences can make.
But the local governments are there.
No, for instance, when I came into Gombe as the first military administrator, it was just a local government. Between 1996, when it was created, and now, if you go to Gombe, you will now see, what it is to be to upgrade it to a state, because so many things, so many developments, human capacity development, the environmental development, so many things have happened to them, to Gombe State right now, and Gombe people. So that the issue, you can never, consign the issue of, state creation to the supposedly the paltry nature of, the treasury, because that is man-made.
Okay.
I think I want to add something, sir.
Yes.
The question of demand for creation of state is question of marginalization. Some of these people demanding for states, it is because their current governments have marginalized them. They have centered those who are in power. They only empower those who are their own people.
We've had these very committed Nigerians spending 4 months. You're taking a break, you're coming back in August, all in a bid to come out with a document that could help Nigeria move forward. Do you believe sincerely, Dr. Orji, that this document you are all laboring to put together will see the light of day? That it can be used to move Nigeria forward, really? We don't have too much time, maybe in 2 sentences or so.
Okay, it is my fervent prayer that majority of Nigerians should see the committed efforts put in by these 494 delegates for 4 months. Because anything that we had done there was born out of patriotism, and also trying to find solution to the numerous problems we have had that had hindered progress, hindered cohesion of the people, and hindered us attaining our lofty heights.
Okay, Dr. Ladi Ibrahim, yes. Do you believe that this document will be used?
Well, I believe through God's grace that with the intent and purpose to which Mr. President convened this conference, if he has the time and the opportunity and the support of his legislators, including his governors, the time span is moving so fast, he would be able to do it all.
On that optimistic note, I'd like to thank both of you for coming on our program. Dr. Ms. Hanatu Ladi Ibrahim, MFR, delegate from Gombe State, Dr. Joe Orji, former governor and a federal government delegate to the National Conference. Thanks for coming on the program.
When television was invented, it was not only to entertain, but to tell stories of heroes on the pains of the weak. To reveal the big secrets and report the little things that matter. To unveil the complex issues and bring reports of events and personalities that shape our lives. Open your mind to true television with Frontline. Hot, incisive, in-depth, straight to the point. Frontline, wherever the news is.
You're still watching Frontline on AIT. In the last several days, there's been a lot of fighting going on in Gaza and in Israel. While Hamas is accusing Israel of not keeping to agreements, Israel is accusing Hamas of fomenting trouble. Well, we had a conversation with the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, and he had this to say.
I have with me the ambassador of Israel in Nigeria, His Excellency Uriel Palti. Mr. Ambassador, you're welcome.
Good to be here again.
Not long ago, I had a chat with you, and that was when we had the unfortunate news that 3 Israeli teenagers were abducted. And after our conversation, a few days after, those kids were discovered murdered. How did you react to that news? Because you were very, very concerned when we had our last interview.
Unfortunately, Mr. Obiora, I had a good reason to be concerned. We found a few days after we met that these 3 young students were murdered by Hamas murderers. And a few days later, those Hamas murderers launched attacks, continuous attacks, which continues until this very moment all over the state of Israel. Continuous barrage of missiles all over the country, whether it's the south, whether it's Beersheba in the south, whether it's Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, where I had the privilege of accompanying His Excellency President Goodluck Jonathan a few months ago, whether it's Tel Aviv, the heartbeat of the nation, whether it's Haifa, whether it's all over the country. And those murderers are trying to destroy the capital, the country of the Jews, the country of the people of Israel. And we will not let them do it.
A lot of criticism came up after the murder of the teenagers, and then a Palestinian teenager was also murdered in Israel. Was that a retaliatory measure?
We are sorry and we are crying about everyone who is getting killed, whether he is Palestinian, whether he is Jewish. The difference that the Hamas are killing, they not differentiate between Jew or Arab. They just want to kill. They just want to murder. We are protecting our people. We are protecting our kids. We are protecting our babies. We are protecting the whole nation of Israel, whether it's Jews, whether it's Arabs. You know, in Israel, there are 8 million people. Over 6 million are Jews, almost 2 million are Arabs. And the Hamas people are launching missiles from the Gaza Strip all over Israel. They don't mind whether it's Jews, whether it's Arabs, whether it's babies, whether it's old people. They are launching the missiles in order to kill people, in order to murder. And we are sorry about everyone who are being killed. We are trying, in order to defend Israel, we are trying to kill the Hamas people. We are trying to stop this killing. We just found yesterday that there are tunnels from the Gaza Strip that they are going to use it in order to send more murderers. And that's why we are trying to stop this terrorist activity.
What you have accused the Hamas of doing, targeting children, women, and everybody, as much as the international community understands your reason for attacking Hamas, you also are accused of also targeting women and children.
No, on the contrary. I think this time, and many times before, the international community understands what's going on. The major difference between Israel and Hamas, that Hamas are sending the missiles in order to kill. And we are trying to stop this killing by destroying Hamas, destroying the terrorist organization. They are using women and children as a shield to hide the Hamas activities behind them, behind their activity. Now, what we have done, we called on all the people who live in the Gaza district, in the area where there are Hamas people, to leave this place.
But they said they don't have anywhere to go to. They said they don't have anywhere to go to.
That's not true. We told them to leave. We exactly pinpoint the area where there are Hamas leaders that we called them. We called them before the activity. We called them to leave the area because we need to find the what we call the head of the snake, the head of the Hamas leaders, in order to defend our people.
Mr. Ambassador, a number of kids were killed in a beach.
That's what area.
There was no Hamas bombs or rockets at the beach.
First thing, I'm sending condolences to the family, and we are really investigating this activity.
You don't think that Israel, as much as they have to protect Israelis, that they are using too much force? Like,
No.
as we speak now, the Israelis are rolling in their tanks into Gaza.
By all norms of international law, we are using proportional force. And all the forces we are using, I'll tell you, on the contrary. 2 days ago, there was a ceasefire, and we have agreed to the ceasefire. The ceasefire was launched by Egypt, and we have agreed to the ceasefire. It was 2 days ago, 9 o'clock in the morning. Hamas violated this ceasefire. We have been waiting almost 3 hours, and Hamas violated the ceasefire. Again, yesterday, there was a humanitarian ceasefire, again being launched by Egypt, by the United States, by Tony Blair, who is the emissary of the quartet, and Hamas again violated the humanitarian ceasefire that we have agreed in order to let the Gaza people to get food, to get milk, to get medical help, and Hamas again violated the ceasefire that was aimed in order to help the Palestinian people in Gaza to get help. So who is not helping the people of Gaza? Just think of it, my friend.
Fawzi Bahoum, the spokesman, the very high-ranking official of Hamas, said negotiation should hold first before a ceasefire. And some of the issues that the Hamas had raised should be discussed, like exchange of prisoners, reopening the borders, border crossings into Gaza, especially at Rafah, and of course, opening the border so that there will be movement of food and free movement of people. Why is Israel not discussing these issues as the ceasefire is also being discussed?
Negotiations should be held all the time. Israel is the one who supports and wants to negotiate all the time with all the sides. We have negotiated with Egypt and we signed the peace treaty. We have negotiated with Jordan and we signed the peace treaty.
Say something about...
Yeah. Well, Mr. Obiora, as I told you, until 1977, when President Sadat of Egypt came from Cairo to Jerusalem, Israel was isolated. The only way to reach Israel was by plane, by boat, or by swimming, because all Arab countries were against Israel. But in 1979, we signed a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. In 1994, I was privileged to be the coordinator of peace between Jordan and Israel. And the late Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, and the late King Hussein signed the peace treaty in the Arava between Israel and Jordan. I was privileged to be the coordinator of the peace talks, and long live President Bill Clinton flew all the way from America to the Arava to witness the peace treaty. So now the geostrategic situation of Israel is totally different. We have peace with Egypt all the way through this border. We have the peace between Jordan and Israel all the way through the eastern border between, it's not anymore a front line, all the way from Kinneret Lake, through the Jordan Valley, through the Dead Sea, all the way to Eilat. We have peace between Jordan and Israel. And here is the Gaza Strip. The Rafah border is between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. So the whole issue that you've just mentioned is between the Hamas, between the people who live in the Gaza Strip and Egypt.
Okay, so Hamas has also accused Israel of violating deals reached after the release of Gilad Shalit in 2011, that even the prisoners that were swapped have been rearrested by Israel.
Unfortunately, those prisoners went back to participate in terrorist activity and what they signed not to do. And you know, this country should be and is the country that understands it firsthand. You have seen, and that I know firsthand, you can just compare Hamas to Boko Haram, to the Shabab in Kenya, to Akim in Morocco, to Hezbollah in Lebanon. I'm afraid that there are some Boko Haram people that, you know, we have dealt recently with people who were kidnapped. Today is, I think it's the 94th day, or the 95th day, 96th day, since the kidnapping of the Chibok girls. And the Chibok girls, hopefully soon, they'll be released. We are all praying to see the Chibok girls coming back home safely. You've seen here in Abuja recently 3 times what's the meaning of terrorist activity. That's what Hamas is doing. Israel and Nigeria are fighting hand in hand together international terrorism. We should continue together to fight international terrorism. Hamas and Boko Haram and Shabab in Kenya, and I've mentioned whether it's Hezbollah, it's all arms of Al-Qaeda. It's all being sponsored by Iran, unfortunately. And we should continue to combat this terrible phenomena of international terrorism. You know, 15 years ago, my friend, Mr. Obiora, we all read this. I wish I could have said a wonderful book of this professor of international relations, Fukuyama, The End of History. And when I read it, I was frightened. I thought all diplomats, which is my profession for the last 32 years, I said we will all be fired because it's the end of history. There's no more room for diplomats. You know, no end and yes, history. You see, there are histories going on, and wars unfortunately goes on in different shape, different attire, different. But you see this phenomena of international terrorism. We should cut this head of the snake. We should cut international terrorism. That's what you are doing here in Nigeria, and that's what we are doing with Hamas.
Not too long ago, in one of the peace agreements, I remember hearing Prime Minister Netanyahu talk about the bonds that hold the Arabs and Israelis. He talked about Ishmael and Isaac.
Exactly.
And it was quite an emotional, it was quite an emotional speech he made. And he was wondering why these 2 nations can't live in peace. I asked you this question the last time, but the question I'm going to ask now is, where do we go from here? The Israelis have rolled in the tanks. Hamas says they will fight to the last man. How do we resolve this issue? We had this issue in 2008, this kind of scenario. We had it in 2012. We're having it again in 2014. And it just happens the same way, an attack by Hamas, a retaliation by Israel, and it balloons to no end. How do you think we can resolve this issue?
You know, had you interviewed me 40 years ago, even 35 years ago, 36 years ago, I would have been maybe desperate. But things have changed in the Middle East since Anwar Sadat came to Jerusalem on November 1977. We have proved to the world that the sons of Ishmael and the sons of Isaac can live together. Israel was established in 1948, 66 years ago. The first 30 years of Israel were five consecutive wars, 48, 56, 67, 67 to 70, and 73. But since Sadat came to Jerusalem, we've signed peace treaty with Egypt. And with all the difficulties, the peace treaty is alive. With all the difficulty. We have an ambassador to Egypt, my good friend Dr. Chaim Koren. There is Egyptian ambassador in Israel. Then, on 1994, as I've mentioned already, I was privileged to be the coordinator of the peace treaty with Egypt. And now we will celebrate the 20th anniversary of the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan. And we have with Jordan the longest border that we have with any, and it's not anymore Frontline, it's international border, recognized border. And it's the longest border in the eastern part of Israel that Israel has between Israel and any other Arab country. So there is today a hope for another peace treaty. We have proved to the world that the sons of Ishmael and the sons of Isaac can live together, can trade together.
So what do you say to the Palestinians today?
Let's continue negotiate and let's have another peace treaty. We have proved to the world that we can live together. We are in the same area. We are in the same Middle East. Let's show to the world that we can have another peace treaty.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Obior. It's always great to have you in the Embassy of Israel.
Well, that was the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, and that's our package for today. I'm Uriel from Abuja, Nigeria. Thanks for watching.